Dr. Drew, great
Yes,
to
sir.
meet you. You've got I don't know what, a dozen shows and podcasts. I'm really honored that you could fit me into your schedule.
It's weird, right? This whole digital thing, I just sort of walk through doors and go, okay, I'll try that. And all of a sudden I've got 5 podcasts. It's crazy.
You know what's funny, though? The way you just described this digital thing, your career since the 1990s has been, what's the right word? Is it a turn of revolutions, one show after another, one product, one radio show, one podcast after another? It seems to me that whether or not it's digital, radio, or television, you've rode the wave of media's transitions.
You're right. It's always been an exploration. There's no blueprint for what I'm doing. I just would sort of see something that interested me. I mean, it all started in 1983. I had an opportunity to go on a radio show in a large, just recently became popular rock radio station, or what they called New Wave back then. And I was receiving messages from one Anthony Fauci that we had to get out there and educate about this thing we were just starting to call AIDS. And that was something I was very involved with, was treating AIDS patients at the time. And much to my amazement, when I got on the radio, no one had ever heard of it. I couldn't believe it. And I thought, well, can I keep coming back and talking about this stuff? And that's where it started. In addition to sort of finding media outlets, I sort of naturally gravitate to what I see to be the kind of medical, cultural problem of the day. I mean, we sort of morphed into trauma and addiction, and all of a sudden COVID, and these are, huge, big medical topics.
Yeah, by the way, New Wave, In Excess, 9 Inch Nails. I'm Gen X.
That was later. That's later. That was like almost 90s. I'm talking Culture Club, Haircut 100, Berlin. This was the early 80s stuff, and it was a British invasion, the second British invasion since the 60s. You have to have lived through it to have been a part of it.
Something fascinating you said there, which I did not realize. So if I go back to your career in the 1980s, and I've read up on you, and the show that was essentially the precursor to Loveline, when you first got on that radio in Los Angeles, and then it morphed through a couple of iterations, and it ultimately became what we know of as Loveline, I believe. But I didn't know that you were incentivized or encouraged within the medical community by Dr. Fauci to get out there and talk about AIDS. I'm curious, and we'll get to COVID and the role of Fauci within the course of this conversation. What was, at the time, in the present tense, what was the perception of how Fauci was handling the HIV crisis?
He was a hero. He was my hero. He was an exceptional resource. It's why when the COVID pandemic started, everything I said got adulterated, of course. That's the way social media is. But at the end of every comment I made, I always go, just listen to Fauci. Let him be your North Star. He knows what he's doing. Let's just listen to what he has to tell us. Now, I feel differently now, but at the beginning of the pandemic, that's where my head was at, because he had been a resource throughout my career. And just to be clear, the show was always called Loveline from the beginning. It morphed into different things, but it was always called Loveline. And K-Rock, the radio station, and the businesses that then bought K-Rock always owned that show. And he was particularly talking to us younger physicians at the time, and we were the ones dealing with the AIDS crisis. I mean, I as a third and fourth year medical student, I sat somebody down at least once a week and told them they had 6 months to live, and that was it. It was a dark, people don't know how horrible that period was. By the same token, thanks to Dr. Fauci and some of the researchers I was working with into it was probably now the mid to later 80s, I was there when we opened the AZT boxes. I was there, and it was Robert Kennedy has some different ideas about this, but I'm here to tell you we had something to offer these men that we were unable to do anything for. We had something to maybe push things back 3 months or 6 months, and maybe during that 6-month period we'd come up with more because research was going so rapidly. So it was, I know Robert Kennedy condemns Fauci for AZT. I'm here to tell you it was a thrilling moment to be able to do something for that disease with not a 2% mortality rate, a 100% mortality.
Dr. Drew, I'm a big believer that as much as we say history repeats itself, what history actually does is it rhymes. it's somewhat similar, but not exact. And,
True.
I hope you'll indulge me for just a moment, and then I would love for you to disavow me or correct me of incorrect notions here.
Okay.
But I certainly came under the idea, and not through the rumor mill, but through research. And I remember I was hosting the 7 o'clock show on Fox News at some point during the height of the pandemic. And there are people throughout the 80s who have a different view of Fauci than you do. And not just Robert F. Kennedy, but it wasn't necessarily just about AZT. It was about other therapeutics that were suppressed in order to support AZT. I bring that up because in the spirit of history rhyming, that's one of the criticisms of Fauci when it comes to COVID, whether or not it was ivermectin or hydroxychloroquine. Everything was talked down in support of the vaccine. Living through the HIV crisis, was that something you were aware of, that you're aware of now? What is your opinion of that version of Fauci's history in HIV?
So excellent point and worth digging in a little bit. So I was not aware at the time. I don't know what he was up to really. I can tell you that within 2 years, we had, in the history of medicine, nothing like this has ever happened. That within a 2-year period, you come up with the first treatment, and 2 years later, by the end of 2 years, you have effective treatment. Now, I don't know what his strategy was, how we ended up, could we have had effective treatment 6 months earlier or 12 months earlier? I don't have an opinion about that. But the fact that we were able to come up with a 100% fatal disease and make it into a chronic illness within a couple of years, that's like nothing like that has ever happened in the history of medicine. So something went right. Did something also go wrong? Maybe. But to your point, think about this. It's something that some echoes of history have been ringing in my head. One of the things that he kept telling us, the younger physician, was to go into the media and to scare people. He was very clear. Tell them there are going to be 2 million people dead. 2 million are going to die if they don't get their shit together. 2 million people. And when at the end of a few years, like by the mid 80s, later 80s, we had 175,000 people dead, and we congratulated ourselves that we scared the crap out of an entire generation. Talk to anybody who was in high school in the 90s, and they would tell you, I was part of that. I thought I was doing the right thing because I knew this was just a virus that could transmit to anybody, and we didn't want to happen what happened in Africa. We didn't want that to happen here, and so we felt justified in using fear. Now, in retrospect, wrong-headed. And by the way, in the course of the AIDS epidemic, we learned that fear is not a good way to change health behavior. The best way is to have a relatable source, narrative, humor, music, what we were doing on Loveline, essentially. So Loveline was sort of the perfect model for actually changing behavior in a kind of a sustained way without untoward effect. It was kids, young people particularly, and young adults, if you give them the info in a way that they can receive it, they will adjust their behavior accordingly. If I sit in a box in a white coat and point my finger at them, not going to go so well.
Wow, so much there that I'd love to follow up on. So first of all, by the way, through the pandemic, I came to believe, throughout my life, if you would have asked me what is the primary human motivation, I might have said envy. Like when you boil it down.
Well, now it is these days, envy, and think about how many injunctions against envy are in every religious scripture, because envy. I have to stop and say that envy is not something that usually is so pervasive as it is today. It is it's the worst that humanity has to offer. It's not jealousy where it's, hey, that guy's got something, I want that, I'm mad at him. It's that guy got something, I have to destroy him. That is envy. It's a narcissistic impulse. It's people that have trauma and narcissism, which we've been in a pandemic of that for the last 20 years. That's when envy emerges. You see narcissism emerge, and I wanted to write a chapter about this in my book on narcissism, about how the only thing I could find similar was revolutionary France, because there was trauma and narcissism all over the place there. And I kept saying, there's going to be guillotines. I know it. There's going to be scapegoating. Some sort of scapegoating mechanism will emerge. And lo and behold, Twitter, cancellation, it came.
Do you think, and by the way, I share your fear of envy. I'm going to get back to COVID in just a minute. We're in the age of narcissism. Look, and you're an internist, but someone who has dealt with, addiction and afflictions of the mind. Let's just play that out. If we're in the age of narcissism and you believe that envy is the worst of all sins and it is pervasive in modern America, are you being only analogous, or are you being literal? Like, where does this take us? Does this take us to guillotines?
I did not expect violence. I just thought there would be some sort of mechanism of scapegoating. Scapegoating is what humans do. It's what narcissists do. So narcissists have a lot of rage and projection, right? And it sounds familiar with what's going on these days, all the projection that's out there. And they gather together and focus their aggression on a scapegoat. That's just a mob behavior. It's a human behavior. It's what we do. And I think one of the things that happens as a result of scapegoating is there's sort of a discharge, and then there's sort of guilt and all stuff that comes on the heels of it. I think we're going through that phase now. The more we talk about it, the more we raise awareness of it, the more people get back into religion and things that can contain it, the better we're going to be.
Yeah, look, and I don't think we've evolved past the point of violence. When I ask you about guillotines, and we can use them as a placeholder, human beings at their base level, I believe, are tribalistic, and if you're driven by envy within those tribes, you will ultimately be pushed toward violence. But back to COVID for a minute. So I had a reconsideration, Dr. Drew, during COVID about envy being the base level human emotion, and I began to appreciate the power of fear. To your point of fear as a bad health motivator, I just feel like the entire society was driven. I came to believe, and we're not just talking about health, I mean, I think executives, I think the power of cancel culture. I just believe that fear is the most powerful base level human motivation. So I'm curious, back to Dr. Fauci, and I know, again, internist, but someone who has dealt with the mind a ton. You can't climb inside his mind. But why would he tell you then, and then I think employ a similar strategy today, scare the hell out of everyone? Is he? Do you think that was done to lower the bar of expectation and then claim victory when you hit some mark below the fear, or is it something else? I mean, look, I am never ever far away from the cynicism of big pharma. So what's the motivation to twice lean into fear?
So let me just give you my brief pedigree in psychiatry and psychology. I moonlit in a psychiatric hospital in the early 80s. I ended up staying at that hospital for 35 years. I ended up taking over their medical services and then ultimately their addiction services, and ran their addiction recovery program for 20 years and have a separate board certification in mental health and addiction medicine. So that's lots of experience on both sides of this.
Yes.
The fear... Because, I'm biased because I had so much what I perceived to have been positive experience from this man. I get a little bit, I can't pass my bias up entirely. So through the lens of my bias, I'm gonna guess, because I never have seen him to be other than a consummate scientist, physician with outcome and well-meaning in mind. That's for 30 years. I kept expecting him to revert back to the mean where he was like that again, but something has adulterated him. And my suspicion is it's not just political adulteration. It's that he's old and he comes from a different era. When think about if you had a pandemic and all you had was CBS, NBC, and ABC to get the message out, you're going to be, and maybe 3 minutes, you're going to use fear. That's probably what they cut their teeth on back when he was 30 years old getting involved in public health. It is a different world, and I don't think they've adjusted to that. And there's something about the way we've trained our public health officials that they do not understand mental health and do not understand the risk reward of some of the choices they've made. They have been it's almost like they don't understand the language of risk reward. And that has been one of the many sort of aha moments I've seen during this pandemic.
So I want to ask you this. I think one of the first times I heard you of course I knew who you were, but one of the first times I heard you in the pandemic, I was in the sports world at the time. And I think I heard you on Colin Cowherd's radio show.
Oh, yeah.
And you've talked about, you mentioned a moment ago that so much of what you had to say at the time was distorted. Look, COVID nothing has drugged the average general population mind into the world of public health, obviously more than COVID. And nothing has driven more skepticism of the average American mind towards not just public health, but to the profession of medicine altogether.
Yes.
I think, look, I'm in and you're in one of the least respected businesses in America, media. But you know what? Medicine and doctors, they haven't caught lawyers, but they're headed down the path of a loss of trust and respectability.
Yep. I just got off of Twitter Spaces that went on for 3 hours with a bunch of physicians worrying about this issue, worried about it. And I'm worried, but we're all worried about it. All I can tell you is that there's all kinds of things going on. I believe it's going to get uncovered. And when it does, things will change direction quickly. I don't want to reveal too much, but there's actually a congressperson on the line with us who talked to us about what the plan was. And I thought, I've heard this before. I heard it from the Justice Department when they said they were going to step in on the opioid crisis. And 6 months later, that changed direction. So I have faith that things are going to change. Within that, people have to understand there is simply there's no better trained, more altruistic group than physicians. I've never seen anything like it. It's why we get ourselves in such trouble. We can't support ourselves. We're too busy supporting our patients. We just lose everything because we're just focused on doing our job every day. And so I do believe if we can get back to doing the job we do and not be adulterated by insurance companies and pharma and being hospital employees, I think it'd be very quickly will be reestablished because at the core, the heart of medicine is still pure and good.
Okay, so I can't let you get away with just teasing me. I'm going to have to follow up a little bit. I'm going to have to dig. Look, I don't even know yet where you are on the COVID vaccine. I think it would be very fair at a minimum to say the medical community has followed groupthink into the path of ignoring risk reward at a minimum, meaning age groups, children, so whatever it may be. Where are you on the vaccine? And why do you think the entire medical establishment is pretty much lockstep into everyone get the latest booster?
I have lived this before through the opioid crisis. It's the exact same phenomenon. Line and verse, it's the same thing. And we went through it in the 1890s with the opioids as physicians. We went through it with psychosurgeries and lobotomies in the 50s. And we went through with the opioid crisis in the 90s. And now we're doing it now. You're going to find that there are somewhere within something, the regulatory agencies, the professional societies, there are going to be evangelists that have used their influence to shut down everything and to sanction. Listen, when I was in the opioid crisis, I was sanctioned by my hospital, the Department of Mental Health, my own California Medical Association, the board, and no help from any of the so-called lobby groups that are supposed to help out doctors for standing up on behalf of my patients. I was 100% right, and I had to suffer for almost a decade, and still patients were dying by the hundreds around me at the hands of my peers. It still happens to this day, unfortunately, but then it was out of control. And the point is, let me find my way back to what you were saying. So my opinion on vaccines is a little nuanced, okay? And people can't handle nuance, and I apologize. So here's what bothers me. We're not allowed to ask questions. Yeah. Is there more sudden death? Yes or no? Yes or no? And if there's more sudden death, what's causing it? And we can't even ask that question. That is disgusting. That is disgusting. And something is wrong with the medical literature right now. I have relied on the medical literature my entire career, and I'm hearing stories of studies that didn't follow the party line, so to speak, being pushed away from legitimate journals and sidelined, and then they get published in downstream journals, and everyone goes, look, it wasn't in the New England Journal. There's something going on in the editorial. I literally, someone tweeted me, I will tell you about pediatric effects of COVID and the multisystem inflammatory disease and how it's so common and how 3 or more organs, it's devastating. And I thought, oh my God, maybe I have missed something. I'm wide open. Maybe I've missed something. Let me look at that literature. This is why maybe finally I can understand why they're pushing the vaccine so hard on kids. I spent hours digging through the medical literature, and after 90 minutes, I literally could not tell whether the multisystem inflammatory disease following COVID was exceedingly common or exceedingly rare. I could not tell. And I've never, ever seen medical literature like that in my career. So something's wrong with the medical literature. So we got to straighten that out. The editorial sort of situation needs to be straightened out. But back to my opinion about vaccine. So it is pretty clear, everybody, that the vaccine helped people over 65. That's a large part of the population that I treat. My patients are all vaxxed and boosted, and I've seen clinically no untoward effect. And the COVID that has developed within my patient population has been mild. Paxlovid has been very useful, causes lots of rebound, but it's been useful for keeping people out of the hospital. My unvaccinated patients have not done as well. That's my clinical experience. In the meantime, I've never watched NFL football when somebody drops dead in the middle of the field. I've never had so many people coming to me talking about friends and family that have had arrhythmias and pulmonary emboli and all kinds of crazy phenomenon that are way outlying phenomenon of any other time in my career. And I'm open to the possibility, because everyone's had COVID now, that a significant majority of that is post-COVID. I don't know. Is it COVID? Is it vaccine? Is it vaccine and COVID? The data I've seen so far suggests mostly vaccine, if not all vaccine. But the data is so bad, I can't tell what's going on. So I would like to be able to ask questions, and I would like the studies to be done to answer those questions. And I was reassured by the congressperson that is one of their priorities. So I'm feeling better. Everyone should feel reassured that things are ramping up in a way. And thank you to Twitter Files for exposing what's really been going on here, because there was another dump today that showed that Pfizer was manipulating Twitter for financial gain.
Oh,
and that
shocker.
is egregious, is insane, and it's out of control. That people's livelihoods can be threatened by these assholes. Let's just say it what it is. This behavior is just outrageous. And so here we are.
Yeah, I love how you characterized it. Look, at a minimum, we need to be able to ask these questions that are of paramount importance. As I said, at a minimum, we've ignored risk reward, but it could be much worse. To your point, it could be we got to explain these sudden cardiac arrests. We got to explain what's going on out there in the world. Let me transition away from COVID for a minute. So I mentioned how many shows you're doing. Why in the world would you sign up to go get your ass kicked by a bunch of special forces guys in the middle of all of this? Why'd you do Fox's special forces reality show?
I was a little depressed, and I was having recurrent diverticulitis at the time. You know, I'm a prostate cancer patient, and I was just feeling old and sort of something wasn't right. And they came to me for this thing, and I was like, is there a camera? Am I being punked? Are you kidding me? And I go, where are you going to take me, to Utah or something? They go, no, the Middle East. I'm like, oh, jeez, what are you talking? How am I going to do that? How would that work even? But I went out that very day and I started training, like really training, like sprinting hills and wearing packs and stuff. And I felt great. And I started responding. And I thought, well, maybe this is what I'm looking for. And I'm profoundly grateful for having done it. What I discovered is it wasn't just that I was whiny and feeling old. I was in denial about my limitations. I was in denial about being old. And if you watch the series, you'll see my face gets pressed to the mirror on that issue. And I came back with clarity. I know my limitations. It's all good. I'm glad to be as good as I am.
You're 64, right?
Yeah.
You're 64. So let me just get this straight. So 20 years ago would have been, you're in your 40s. So I don't know what it was. My dad was older than you. So the midlife crisis of the 1980s would have been a sports car. The midlife crisis of now is to get your ass kicked by a bunch of special forces guys. I mean, I think
why not?
It's to get in shape.
Yeah,
it's a better midlife crisis.
It's a better midlife crisis because those guys with the sports cars also cheated and screwed up their families. And
this is way better.
We're just going out in the desert and having near-death experiences. It's way better.
But you're not alone.
More clarity, that's for sure.
You're not alone. I'm friends with some guys, you may know them, and they're in LA, some Navy SEALs who are doing they have a course for guys, in their 40s and 50s who are going through exactly what you're going through. Hey, I want to challenge myself in more physical ways, and they sign up to do kind of what you did. And I think we can say this because it's aired. So in the first episode, I think was it a 14-hour day? You got dehydrated. It just, the Middle East got you?
Well, you only see a portion of what we were going through. We were crawling and crab walking and duck walking and running and and it was 120 degrees. The narrator kept saying it's 100 degrees. No, it was 120 degrees. It was 105 at the shore where they had us held up for a week. And again, the great thing that came out of this thing was these relationships with all the other cast members. We got through it because of one another. We got very bonded up. We're all friends to this day. But I was into it. We'd jumping out of helicopters. We were being marched through the desert. I really loved it. It was scary and unsettling, and I could never get my feet under me. But it was. I thought, wow, this is an incredible experience. And then all of a sudden, I had a headache and nausea, and I just went down. I can tell you, it took me 5 liters of IV fluid before I could stand up again. So that's how far down I was. And that was after spending 4 hours trying to rehydrate orally. I just couldn't get it. I would have given anything to stay. It was a great experience.
Well, I've seen a couple episodes to the point of your fellow cast members. You're talking about professional athletes like Dwight Howard and Mike Piazza. You're talking about Olympians and gymnastics and skiing. Yeah, it's an interesting group of people to go through something hard together. Hey,
and when you get there, when I got there, by the way, I was thinking, well, these are the guys. I mean, come on now, come on. I've got Dwight Howard, and but it was funny. It was they stripped us down so thoroughly that I did not feel in a lot of it like anybody had any special advantages, because they would come at each of us with our whatever the weaknesses were and whatever they felt we needed to sort of to shove our face in the sand, whatever it might be. So I never felt like they had significant advantage. Although my age, I'm so mad at myself for not paying more attention to that. I'm just so mad. Because I kept thinking the cardiovascular stuff is going to be the problem, and that was not the problem. It was literally volume. Jeez,
right?
Terrible.
Okay, you mentioned this a moment ago when you talked about COVID and sudden death. That it's like you get an accumulation of anecdotal moments through the news cycle, or through your own personal life. There's another subject that you're very well versed to talk to us about. And that is, I think there's an accumulation of anecdotal experiences for almost everyone now of someone who has died of fentanyl. Do you, and you have dealt with addiction throughout your career, but I'm curious, do you see fentanyl as an American addiction and drug abuse story, or is it an international story of, quite honestly, poison?
I mean, it's the same thing as opium was during the opium wars in China, right? It's addiction here, but it's being perpetrated by nefarious forces. And now we're at the time, what you're going to see. So here's where we are in this, opioid is an opioid. I always felt like it's just opioid addiction. The problem with fentanyl is, and this is the unique thing about it, is that it's getting incorporated into all the illicit drugs available on the market. And so kids just screwing around with Xanax or whatever, or Adderall, are getting exposed to this stuff and dying. So you're having non-addicts die of opiate overdose. And that group, that population is a straight line up. When people start seeing, get a few, like maybe another year under our belt of how steep that slope is, it's going to be a national issue. People are going to blow people's minds how profound that is. The fentanyl users, the heroin addicts that are now using fentanyl, they're learning how to use it. They like fentanyl. They prefer fentanyl, and they're drug addicts, and they're doing their thing, and they're learning how to. They're chemists. They're brilliant at what they do with drug addicts and how they adjust things. They've adjusted course. They're using fentanyl. It's cheaper. It's better. They like it better. It's what it is, and what it. To me, fentanyl, heroin, no big deal. Little narrower safety profile, but okay. But the drugs that are getting the fentanyl that are not opiates, that are killing kids in their bedrooms, that is a profoundly different story.
Yes. But Dr. Drew, I've never had this question answered for me adequately. In your understanding, why would the drug producer and the drug dealer, the cartel, why would they be putting fentanyl in Xanax or Adderall or some other drug? The point of the poisoning is exactly as you described it. It's a user who's not choosing to go buy fentanyl that is dying. So if you're killing a potential customer, why are they putting fentanyl in these other drugs? If they're putting it as a substitute for heroin, I get it. Why is it in Xanax?
Well, you could argue, I'm being generous by saying, well, maybe they want to hook them on opiates and sort of become an opiate customer, but fentanyl is pennies. Why would they be wanting somebody to be a fentanyl addict? That's not a very good business practice. So it does sort of open the door to some nefarious intent, doesn't it? If you get a little conspiratorial when you think about it, but what are you supposed to think? It's back to your frame as they're poisoning people in this country.
Yes. I don't know where you are on this. And I've evolved, by the way, over time on this. Not in the way you expect most people to evolve, actually. But where are you on drug legalization?
I sort of stay agnostic on it, though my experience with cannabis has been sort of desperate. Like, we used to be able to use the law to help the cannabis addicts. And the potency of the cannabis now, and the amount of the sort of rigidity and changes in their thinking and their ability to function in their life is so profound that they They don't see what's happening to them. See, one of the great sort of issues in addiction medicine and psychiatry generally is lack of insight, right? These serious mental illnesses cause a block in insight. I call it a neurological syndrome called anosognosia. It's when people have strokes, they don't realize that half their body's gone. That's a term coined 100 years, 150 years ago, 120 years ago. So anosognosia literally prevents people from seeing what's happening to them. Much like if they were demented. Same thing with dementia. It blocks, they can't see what's happening. And so you have to kind of have a way to get through to people and to motivate them to get themselves better. Making things legal takes away something from our toolkit. And so while I have certainly no political beliefs on legal or illegal, when the controversy was up in California, I was just saying, let's just make it legal and get over with so we can start to have conversations about the reality of this drug. Unfortunately, it's sacrificing a lot of young people, a lot. And it's essentially legal here. Everything's legal here in California, just so you know it. I mean, you can traffic legally, you can steal legally to support your habit, and you can use in California. So it's here. And look at our streets, see where that goes.
Yeah, by the way, I used to be much more libertarian on this issue. Now, it's really with the rise of these synthetic drugs like fentanyl or methamphetamine that I've become a little more restrictive in my political approach to it. Hey, I had Alex Berenson, who's famous. Alex is famous for his positions on COVID throughout the pandemic. But Alex has written on a lot of things when he was at the New York Times and now on his own. And one of the things that he is fascinated by is cannabis, is THC.
Yep.
And he makes the argument that it's because of what you said, it's a different drug than what you thought of in the 1960s, and that it has serious mental health issues and can cause a psychotic break. Where are you on, like, in the popular discourse? Hey, come on, man, it's weed. It's no big deal.
Yeah, and for some people, that's true. My daughter is just over 1 year sober from cannabis. Her life was destroyed by it. And she got a hold of, I sort of tilted her towards Alex's books after she'd been 9 months sober. And she said, why didn't somebody show me this? Everything in here is exactly what I experienced and what I saw in my friends. And I had to remind her that I had shown her the book multiple times when she was using, but that's the problem when people are using it, they don't want to hear it. But now that she's got clarity and seeing things she's become evangelical, and Alex is one of her heroes.
So you definitely agree with the premise then, I take it, that this is a drug that has serious mental health and psychological implications.
Oh, I see it all the time. Not for everybody, but there are of course people that could use it and whatever and are fine. I don't judge anybody using any drugs. If you want to do that, but I have firsthand experience in my own family, and of course in patient populations I see lots of this, and in certain people it gets them, and it destroys young lives. That's the part that's really so disturbing.
All right, last thing I want to talk about with you today here is we've talked about, you've got like so many podcasts and TV shows. You just did this reality show with Fox. Do you have an average day? And if you do, what does it look like?
I don't have. I have average weeks. I have weeks that are sort of scheduled a certain way, including seeing patients. I go to the office and see patients, including going over to Corolla's and doing a podcast with him that we do 3 days a week, including a streaming show I do that my wife produces that I would do out of this studio here. This is a studio that we work out of, and this streaming show has become really about COVID and about vaccines. And I work with a doctor named Kelly Victory, who has very different opinions than me, and we interview the people that have been silenced during the pandemic. And I learned something from some of them I disagree with on a lot of the stuff, but I learned something from every one of them. Mm-hmm. And that has been an eye-opening experience in and of itself. And that's actually a very popular podcast called, our streaming show. It's called Ask Dr. Drew, drdrew.tv, drdrew.com. You can get it all there. And then the rest of my week is, it depends. I mean, I have to go to Austin every six weeks or so to do Dr. Drew After Dark. I have the great pleasure of going to New York regularly and working there. You can't imagine how grateful I am. So here's the thing with me. I've had this, I was a severe workaholic. Like, I would get up at 5 a.m. I would struggle to get home at 10 at night. A weekend off, I would only work 8 hours a day, weekends off. And I would see, 40 to 60 patients a day. I had this huge clinical experience where I was doing critical care, hospital care, outpatient medicine, inpatient psychiatry, addiction medicine. And I did that for 20 years, did some of it for 30 years. And I've had this experience that really no physician gets anymore. Your doctors aren't allowed to work in the ICU unless they're a hospitalist. They can't do hospital care and outpatient care. It's all compartmentalized. And I had this very rich experience that I now want to just give back. I just want to just use my experience to try to make a difference, and to have the opportunity to do it in all these different formats and environments. It is gratitude like you can't imagine. I'm so grateful for that.
Well, I'm grateful you gave us some time today. I've enjoyed the conversation thoroughly. I hope I get a chance to talk to you more. Dr. Drew, I can't wait to. I think everybody should be tuning into, as you said, drdrewtv.tv and learning and ask Dr. Drew about these ongoing conversations about the most important, well, look, between fentanyl and COVID, just some of the most important public health issues, not just of our time, but of the past 50 years, 100 years.
And I think this is going to be a rapidly evolving topic over the next 6 to 12 months. I'm very interested to see how this plays out.
All right. Dr. Drew, thank you so much.
Thanks, Will. Appreciate it.
Hey, it's Will Cain. Click here to subscribe to the Fox News channel on YouTube. It's the best way to get our latest interviews and highlights. And click to subscribe to the Will Cain podcast for full episodes right now.